The crimson sunrise painted the sky as Zeke Keller's boots crunched along the pebbled riverbank of the Rio Grande. The year was 1875, and the New Mexico territory was as wild and untamed as the stallion he'd broken just last week. His morning ritual of checking his property's water access before starting the day's work came to an abrupt halt when he spotted something unusual caught between two jutting rocks where the current slowed, a flash of fabric, the pale curve of what appeared to be a human arm. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, quickening his pace. The closer he got, the more his stomach knotted. It was a woman, face down in the shallows, her dress torn and bloodied, dark hair fanned out across the water's surface like spilled ink. Zeke splashed into the frigid water without hesitation. His calloused hands gently turned her over, revealing a face as pale as moonlight with a nasty gash across her forehead. She couldn't have been more than 25, with delicate features that even in unconsciousness held a quiet strength. "Madam, can you hear me?" he called, pressing his fingers against her neck, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding when he felt a faint pulse. "You're alive. That's something." She didn't respond, but her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Zeke scanned the riverbank for any sign of companions or belongings, but found nothing. Whoever she was, she'd either been abandoned or had survived something terrible. He gathered her in his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite her water-logged clothes. His ranch was a mile upriver, and with every step he felt the woman's life hanging by a thread. The blood from her head wound had matted her hair, and several cuts and bruises marked her arms. "Hang on," he whispered. "Just hang on." By the time Zeke carried her through the door of his modest ranch house outside of Deeming, New Mexico territory, his shirt was soaked with river water and her blood. He laid her gently on his bed, then hurried to stoke the fire in the hearth. His housekeeper, Mrs. Abigail Porter, nearly dropped the basket of eggs she'd been collecting when she entered and saw the scene before her. "Good heavens, Mr. Keller. What's happened here?" "Found her in the river, Mrs. Porter. She's barely holding on. Fetch the medical supplies and heat some water. Then ride into town for Doc Williams." The older woman set down her basket and moved with surprising speed for someone in her 60s. Gathering clean cloths and the box of medical supplies Zeke kept on hand for ranch injuries. As Zeke carefully removed the woman's sodden outer garments to assess her injuries, he discovered more bruises, a possible broken rib, and what looked like a bullet graze along her side. This was no accident. Someone had tried to kill her. For 3 days, the woman hovered between life and death. Doc Williams had come and gone, leaving medicine and instructions but not much hope. "If she makes it through the week, it'll be nothing short of a miracle," he'd said gravely. Zeke took to calling her that miracle as he sat beside her bed during the long nights, occasionally wiping her brow with a cool cloth when fever took hold or spooning broth between her lips when she seemed able to swallow. On the dawn of the 4th day, as Zeke dozed in the chair beside the bed, a hoarse whisper pulled him from sleep. "Water." His eyes snapped open to find hers deep brown like rich soil after rain, regarding him with confusion and fear. "You're awake," he said, reaching for the water cup on the bedside table. "Easy now. Small sips." He helped her lift her head slightly, and she drank greedily before sinking back against the pillows. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "My ranch, about 5 miles outside of Deeming. Found you half dead in the river 4 days ago. I'm Zeke Keller." She closed her eyes, a flicker of pain crossing her features. I can't remember." "Your name?" Zeke asked gently. She shook her head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Nothing. I remember nothing." Zeke leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Well, I've been calling you Miracle, on account of you surviving when Doc Williams thought you wouldn't. Seems fitting until your real name comes back to you." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she drifted back to sleep. The next time she woke, Mrs. Porter was changing her bandages. The housekeeper immediately called for Zeke, who was mending a fence not far from the house. "She's asking questions, Mr. Keller," Mrs. Porter said quietly when Zeke arrived, wiping his hands on a rag. "And eating a bit of stew. Seems stronger already." Zeke nodded and entered the bedroom, finding Miracle propped up against the pillows. Some color returned to her cheeks. "Mrs. Porter tells me you've been looking after me," she said, her voice stronger than before though still raspy. "Thank you." "Anyone would have done the same," he replied, suddenly uncomfortable under her direct gaze. "No," she said with certainty. "Not anyone." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Anything coming back to you, your name, where you're from?" She closed her eyes, concentration furrowing her brow. "Sometimes I feel like it's right there, just beyond my reach. But then it slips away again. All I have are feelings, sensations, being in water, being afraid." She opened her eyes, revealing unshed tears. "Someone trying to kill me." Zeke pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. "Your wounds suggest as much. Bullet graze on your side. Looked like you'd been beaten before you ended up in the river." "Why can't I remember?" Frustration edged her voice. "Doc says it might be the head wound. Or—" He hesitated. "Sometimes the mind protects itself by forgetting terrible things. Might be better if you don't rush it." She nodded slowly, then looked down at her hands, which bore scrapes and healing cuts. "These aren't a lady's hands. I worked for my living." "That narrows things down some," Zeke said. "Not many respectable jobs for women in these parts. Teacher maybe, seamstress, nurse." Something flashed in her eyes. "Nurse, that feels—" She shook her head. "I don't know." "Well, Miracle will do for now," Zeke said, standing. "You focus on healing. We'll figure out the rest in time." As the days passed, Miracle grew stronger. Within 2 weeks, she could stand with assistance and take short walks around Zeke's bedroom. Her physical recovery outpaced her memory's return, which came only in brief, disjointed flashes that left her more confused than enlightened. One afternoon, as she sat in a chair near the window watching Zeke work with a young horse in the corral, Mrs. Porter brought her a cup of tea. "He's good with those animals," Miracle observed. "They trust him." Mrs. Porter smiled knowingly. "Mr. Keller has a way about him. Been working this land for 7 years now. Came out from Missouri after the war looking for a fresh start like so many did. Built this place from nothing but dust and determination." "He's not married?" Miracle asked, then felt heat rise to her cheeks at the directness of her question. "Was engaged once back east. She died of influenza before they could wed. Never showed interest in anyone since." Mrs. Porter patted Miracle's shoulder. "Until he started spending every spare moment at your bedside, that is." Miracle watched as Zeke removed his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin, and a face that might have been considered handsome if not for the scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw, likely a war wound, she guessed. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and when he smiled, as he did now at something his ranch hand said, it transformed his normally serious expression into something warm and inviting. "I can't stay here indefinitely," Miracle said quietly. "I'm nothing but a burden until I can work." "Nonsense," Mrs. Porter replied firmly. "Mr. Keller has plenty of means, and he's not the type to turn away someone in need. Besides," she added with a wink, "I could use the help in the kitchen once you're stronger. My old bones aren't what they used to be." That evening, when Zeke came in for supper, Miracle was seated at the table for the first time. She wore a simple dress Mrs. Porter had altered from one of her own, her dark hair neatly braided and hanging over one shoulder. The sight stopped Zeke in his tracks. "Well now," he said after a moment, "this is a welcome sight. You're looking more yourself." "Whoever that may be," she replied with a small smile. Over the simple meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, Miracle broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Mrs. Porter mentioned I might help in the kitchen once I'm fully recovered. I'd like to earn my keep somehow." Zeke set down his fork. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you my life," she countered. "And while I appreciate your generosity, I can't accept charity indefinitely. It doesn't feel right to me." He studied her for a long moment. "Prideful, are you?" "I believe I am," she answered, surprising herself with the certainty of it. "That's something I know about myself, at least." Zeke's mouth quirked up at one corner. "All right, then. Mrs. Porter could use the help, and I won't deny having another pair of hands around here would be welcome, but only when Doc Williams gives his approval." "Deal, deal," she agreed. Later that night, unable to sleep, Miracle found herself drawn to the window. The moon illuminated the landscape, casting long shadows across the yard and outbuildings. She could make out Zeke's figure sitting on the porch, smoking a pipe, seemingly lost in thought. Without fully deciding to do so, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way quietly through the house. Zeke looked up in surprise when the door creaked open. "Should you be up?" he asked, immediately standing. "Probably not," she admitted. "But I've spent enough time in that bed to last a lifetime." He gestured to the empty chair beside his. "Join me, then. Night air's good medicine." She settled into the chair, breathing deeply of the cool desert air, tinged with the scent of sage and Zeke's pipe tobacco. "Beautiful," she murmured, gazing up at the vast expanse of stars. "That it is," Zeke agreed, though when she glanced over, she found him looking at her rather than the sky. He quickly averted his gaze when their eyes met. They sat in comfortable silence for a time before Miracle spoke again. "What if I never remember? What if someone is looking for me?" Zeke tamped out his pipe thoughtfully. "I sent word to the sheriff in Deeming and a few of the neighboring towns. No reports of a missing woman matching your description. As for remembering," he shrugged, "might be that's up to fate. Or God if you're the believing sort. And if I don't, remember that is. Then you start fresh. Plenty of folks out here reinventing themselves. It's the nature of the frontier." She considered this, finding unexpected comfort in the idea. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for saving me, but for everything since." Zeke seemed embarrassed by her gratitude. "You should get back to bed before Mrs. Porter catches us both and gives me an earful about your recovery." Miracle laughed, a sound that surprised them both in its lightness. "She is rather protective." "Of both of us," Zeke agreed, offering his arm for support as she stood. Their eyes met again, and something passed between them, a current of awareness that neither was prepared to acknowledge. Miracle looked away first, her heart beating faster than her brief exertion warranted. "Good night, Mr. Keller, Zeke," he corrected gently. "Just Zeke." "Good night, Zeke," she amended, finding she liked the feel of his name on her lips. "Good night, Miracle." As the weeks passed, Miracle's strength returned in full. By early July, 6 weeks after Zeke had pulled her from the river, she was helping Mrs. Porter with household chores and even assisting with meals. Her hands proved deft at cooking and mending, though she still couldn't say how she'd acquired these skills. Small fragments of memory occasionally surfaced: the smell of antiseptic, the sound of a piano playing a particular melody, the taste of blackberry preserves on fresh bread, but nothing substantial enough to piece together her past. Sheriff Thomas Buchanan from Deeming rode out to the ranch one afternoon, his expression grave as he removed his hat upon entering the house. Mr. Keller, he nodded to Zeke before turning to Miracle. Madam, I received a wire I thought might interest you. Miracle's heart leapt. About me? Possibly. The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. There's been inquiries about a missing woman from a town called Silver City, about 50 miles northwest of here. Name of Bridget Norwood, 24 years old, dark hair, slight build. She was a nurse at the mining company hospital until she disappeared nearly 2 months ago. Miracle felt dizzy suddenly, gripping the back of a chair for support. Bridget, she whispered, testing the name. Bridget Norwood. Zeke moved to her side, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching her. Does that sound right to you? She closed her eyes, trying to connect the name to her fragmented sense of self. I don't know. It's like trying to put on someone else's clothes. It might fit, but it doesn't feel like mine yet. Sheriff Buchanan nodded sympathetically. According to the wire, this Bridget was last seen leaving the hospital after treating the brother of a man named Victor Blackwell. He's a mining company enforcer with a bad reputation. Word is the brother died under her care and Blackwell blamed her. The mining company hospital, Miracle repeated slowly. That feels familiar. Zeke's jaw tightened. You think this Blackwell character might have tried to kill her, revenge for his brother, the sheriff shrugged. It's a theory that fits the facts we have. Blackwell's the type who holds grudges and doesn't mind getting his hands dirty. If Miss Norwood here did something he perceived as wrong. I would never deliberately harm a patient, Miracle said with unexpected vehemence. The certainty of this knowledge shocked her. If I am this Bridget, and if I was a nurse, I took an oath to do no harm. Both men looked at her with surprise at the passion in her voice. Well, the sheriff said after a moment, if you're willing, I could arrange for someone from Silver City to come identify you. Or you could travel there yourself, see if the place jogs your memory. Fear clutched at Miracle's heart. If this man Blackwell tried to kill me once. We won't let that happen again, Zeke said firmly. But it's your decision. No one will force you to go anywhere you don't want to. Miracle glanced between the two men, grateful for Zeke's protectiveness yet anxious about what returning to Silver City might reveal. I need to know who I am, she said finally. Even if it's dangerous, I can't keep living in this limbo. The sheriff nodded. I'll send word that we may have found their missing nurse. In the meantime, you stay put. If Blackwell is responsible and thinks you're dead, better to keep it that way until we know more. After the sheriff departed, Zeke found Miracle sitting on the porch, staring out at the distant mountains with unfocused eyes. Bridget Norwood, she said as he approached. Do I look like a Bridget to you? Zeke leaned against the porch railing, considering her. Can't say, you've only ever been Miracle to me. He paused. Do you feel like a Bridget? She shook her head slowly. I don't know what I feel anymore. When I try to remember, it's like looking through muddy water. Sometimes I think I see shapes, but they're gone before I can make sense of them. You don't have to go to Silver City if you don't want to, Zeke said quietly. Miracle looked up at him, seeing the concern in his eyes. But I do. I need to know, even if what I find is unpleasant. I can't build a future without understanding my past. Something flickered across Zeke's face, disappointment perhaps. Of course, he said evenly. I'll accompany you when the time comes. You won't face it alone. She reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand. Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you, Zeke. His fingers tightened briefly around hers before he withdrew his hand, as if the contact had burned him. Anyone would have done the same, he repeated his earlier refrain. Though they both knew it wasn't true, 3 days later, a telegram arrived from Silver City. The hospital administrator would be traveling to Deeming within the week to determine if Miracle was indeed their missing nurse, Bridget Norwood. The news set Miracle on edge. She threw herself into household chores with near-frantic energy, as if keeping busy could hold her anxiety at bay. Mrs. Porter watched her with growing concern as she scrubbed the kitchen floor for the second time that week. "You'll wear a hole right through those boards if you keep it like that," the older woman observed. Miracle sat back on her heels, pushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I need to do something. Waiting is unbearable." Mrs. Porter eased herself into a chair at the table. "Child, whatever you learn about your past won't change who you are now. The woman I've come to know these past weeks is kind, hardworking, and stronger than she knows." Miracle's eyes welled with unexpected tears. "But what if I'm not? What if I did something terrible? This man wanted me dead for a reason. Men like that rarely need good reasons, Mrs. Porter said firmly. "And whatever the truth may be, you've got people in your corner now. Remember that." That night at supper, Zeke announced he would be riding into town the next day to finalize arrangements for the meeting with the hospital administrator. "Sheriff Buchanan suggests we meet at his office. Safer that way in case word gets back to Blackwell." "I'm coming with you," Miracle said immediately. Zeke shook his head. "Better you stay here until the actual meeting. Less chance of anyone recognizing you prematurely." "I've been cooped up on this ranch for nearly 2 months," Miracle protested. "I need to see something besides these 4 walls and your pasture, Zeke, please." He studied her determined expression and sighed. "All right. But you'll stay close, wear a hat with a veil, and we'll avoid the busier parts of town. First sign of trouble we leave." "Agreed, agreed," she said, a smile brightening her face for the first time in days. The following morning, Miracle wore her simplest dress Mrs. Porter had sewn for her, and a borrowed bonnet with a light veil that obscured her features without completely hiding them. The ride into Deeming took just over an hour, and despite her nervousness, Miracle found herself enjoying the journey. The vast landscape of the New Mexico territory spread out around them, dotted with mesquite and cactus, the distant mountains a hazy blue against the horizon. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "In a stark sort of way." Zeke nodded, his eyes scanning their surroundings with the habitual vigilance of a man accustomed to frontier dangers. "Takes some getting used to if you're from greener places, but it grows on you. There's a kind of honesty to this land. It doesn't pretend to be gentle or forgiving." "Like its people," Miracle observed. Zeke glanced at her with a hint of a smile. "Some of its people, maybe." Deeming in 1875 was a growing town, having sprung up around the Southern Pacific Railroad just a few years earlier. Its wide Main Street was lined with false-fronted buildings: a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a hotel, and various other businesses that constituted civilization on the frontier. True to his word, Zeke guided their wagon down side streets, avoiding the busier central thoroughfare. They stopped first at the sheriff's office, where Buchanan confirmed the administrator from Silver City would arrive on tomorrow's train. "Got you a room at Mrs. Winslow's boarding house," the sheriff told them. "Respectable place, and she doesn't ask too many questions. Figure it's safer than the hotel, where this Blackwell might have eyes and ears if he's still looking." Zeke nodded his thanks. "We've got some supplies to pick up before heading back. Anything new we should know?" "Nothing concrete," Buchanan said, lowering his voice. "But I've been making inquiries. Blackwell's still in Silver City, far as anyone knows. Has quite the reputation up there enforcer for the mining company, but rumor has it he's not above working outside those bounds when there's profit in it. Smuggling, protection rackets, that sort of thing." Miracle felt a chill run down her spine. "And you think he wanted me dead because his brother died under my care? If you are indeed Miss Norwood, then yes, that's the theory." From what I've gathered, his brother was brought in with a mining injury, crushed leg, died of infection a few days later. Blackwell blamed the hospital staff, particularly the nurse who treated him most often. But that's not fair, Miracle protested. Infections happen despite the best care, especially with mining injuries. They're notoriously dirty wounds. Both men looked at her with raised eyebrows. That sounded very much like a nurse speaking, Sheriff Buchanan observed. Miracle blinked, surprised at her own certainty. I suppose it did. After leaving the sheriff's office, Zeke took Miracle to the general store where they purchased flour, coffee, sugar, and a few other necessities. Miracle found herself drawn to a display of fabric, her fingers running over the different textures with evident pleasure. "See something you like?" Zeke asked, coming up beside her. She indicated a bolt of soft blue cotton. "It's lovely. Reminds me of..." She frowned, trying to grasp the elusive memory. "Something, I don't know what," Zeke signaled to the shopkeeper. "We'll take 5 yards of that blue," he said decisively. "Zeke, no," Miracle protested. "It's an unnecessary expense. Consider it payment for all the help you've been giving Mrs. Porter," he replied. "Besides, you can't keep wearing borrowed clothes forever." The shopkeeper, a friendly woman named Mrs. Henderson, smiled as she measured out the fabric. "Your wife has good taste, Mr. Keller. This just came in on the train last week." Neither of them corrected her assumption. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Miracle noticed Zeke seemed preoccupied, his usual alertness even more pronounced. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly. Zeke's eyes scanned the street before returning to her. "Not sure, just a feeling." "Let's get to Mrs. Winslow's place. I'd feel better if you were settled somewhere safe while I finish the errands." Mrs. Winslow's boarding house was a neat, 2-story building on a quiet side street. The widow herself greeted them warmly, showing Miracle to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor, with Zeke's adjoining. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Winslow informed them. "And I don't allow gentlemen callers in the ladies' rooms," she added with a pointed look at Zeke, who quickly explained their situation. "Well, that's different then," the widow said, her expression softening. "Poor thing, not knowing who you are, must be terribly disorienting." "It is," Miracle admitted, "but hopefully tomorrow will bring some answers." After Mrs. Winslow departed, Zeke hesitated in the doorway. "I need to see about some ranch business while we're in town. Will you be all right here for a few hours?" "Of course," Miracle assured him. "I might rest a bit." The ride was more tiring than I expected. Zeke nodded, seeming reluctant to leave. "Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mrs. Winslow." "You're worried," she observed. "Just cautious," he corrected, though his expression said otherwise. "I won't be long." After Zeke left, Miracle did indeed lie down, intending only to rest briefly. But the emotional strain of the past few days caught up with her, and she soon fell into a deep sleep. She dreamed of a hospital ward, beds lined up in neat rows, the smell of carbolic acid sharp in her nostrils. She moved between the patients, checking bandages, administering medicines. A man groaned in pain, a miner with a badly crushed leg, his face contorted in agony. "Please," he begged, clutching at her hand. "Make it stop." "I'm doing everything I can, Mr. Blackwell," she heard herself say. "But you must be patient. Healing takes time." Another man appeared at the foot of the bed, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "My brother's dying, and all you can offer is platitudes." His voice was cold, menacing. "I paid good money to ensure he got the best care." "We don't accept bribes here, Mr. Blackwell," she replied firmly. "And your brother is receiving exactly the same excellent care as every other patient. You'll regret that decision, nurse." He stepped closer, his face coming into the light, hard features, a thin scar across one cheek, eyes like chips of ice. No one refuses Victor Blackwell and lives to boast about it. Miracle woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. The dream had been so vivid, so real, not like a dream at all, but a memory. She sat up, pressing her hands to her temples as more fragments slotted into place. The hospital in Silver City. Her small room in the nurses' quarters. The head nurse, Mrs. Fleming, strict but fair. And Victor Blackwell, whose brother had died despite their best efforts, who had threatened her the day of the funeral. She remembered now she was Bridget Norwood, 24 years old, orphaned at 16 and trained as a nurse by the Sisters of Charity in Santa Fe, before taking the position in Silver City 2 years ago. She remembered walking home from a late shift, the sound of footsteps behind her, turning to see 2 men she didn't recognize. The blow to her head, waking briefly in the back of a wagon, bound and gagged. The terror when she realized they were taking her to the river. Bridget, for she now knew that was truly her name, paced the small room, trembling with the force of the returning memories. She had managed to work her bonds loose during the journey, and when one of the men had pulled her from the wagon near the riverbank, she had fought with desperate strength. There had been a gun, a struggle, pain as the bullet grazed her side, then being pushed into the river, the current carrying her downstream as darkness claimed her consciousness. She needed to tell Zeke, needed to warn him that Blackwell was more dangerous than they had realized. But when she tried the door, she found it locked from the outside. Bridget frowned, rattling the handle. Zeke had told her to lock it from inside, not that he would lock her in. A sound from the window made her turn sharply. Someone was on the small balcony that ran along the second floor of the boarding house. Heart in her throat, Bridget backed away from the window just as it slid open, revealing a man she had never seen before, rough-looking, with a week's growth of beard and eyes that held no kindness. "Well now," he drawled, stepping into the room, "if it ain't the nurse that got away, Mr. Blackwell's gonna be mighty pleased." Bridget opened her mouth to scream, but the man moved with surprising speed, clamping a hand over her mouth and pinning her against the wall. "None of that," he growled. "Cooperate and this doesn't have to hurt. Mr. Blackwell just wants a word with you." Bridget knew with bone-deep certainty that if this man took her to Blackwell, she would not survive the encounter. With strength born of fear, she bit down hard on his hand and brought her knee up sharply between his legs. The man howled in pain, loosening his grip enough for Bridget to break free. She grabbed the porcelain water pitcher from the washstand and smashed it against the side of his head. He staggered but didn't fall, lunging for her again with a curse. Bridget darted for the door, frantically trying the handle again even though she knew it was locked. The man seized her by the hair, yanking her backward with enough force to make her cry out. "You'll pay for that, you little—" The door burst open with such violence that it tore partly from its hinges. Zeke stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury, revolver drawn. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. The intruder hesitated, then smiled unpleasantly, using Bridget as a shield. "Well now, looks like we got ourselves a hero. Put down the gun, cowboy, or I'll snap her pretty neck." Zeke's eyes met Bridget's for the briefest moment, a silent communication passing between them. She gave the slightest nod, then went limp in her captor's arms, throwing off his balance. The split-second distraction was all Zeke needed. His gun barked once, and the man cried out as the bullet tore through his shoulder. He released Bridget, who stumbled forward into Zeke's waiting arm. With his other hand, Zeke kept the gun trained on the wounded intruder. "Don't move," he warned the man who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and glaring with hatred. "Bridget, are you hurt?" "No," she gasped, clinging to him. "How did you know?" "Saw a stranger watching the boarding house." Something didn't feel right, so I circled back. His arm tightened around her. Good thing I did. Mrs. Winslow appeared in the hallway behind them, a shotgun in her hands. What in heaven's name is happening in my establishment? This man broke in through the window, Zeke explained tersely. Attempted abduction. Send your boy for the sheriff if you would, madam. Within the hour, Sheriff Buchanan had the would-be kidnapper locked in the town jail and was questioning him vigorously. Bridget and Zeke sat in the sheriff's office, a pot of strong coffee between them. He's talking, Buchanan said when he returned. Name's Cal Jennings. Says Victor Blackwell hired him to find and eliminate a nurse who could testify about some shady business with the mining company hospital. Seems your memory loss might have been a blessing in disguise, Miss Norwood. If you'd remembered sooner, you might have gone back to Silver City and walked right into Blackwell's hands. I remember now, Bridget said quietly. Not everything, but enough. Blackwell's brother died in my care, a mining accident, complicated by infection. But that's not why he wants me dead. She took a steadying breath. Before he died, George Blackwell was delirious with fever. He kept talking about the bodies in the old shaft, said his brother would kill him if he knew he was talking. I didn't think much of it at the time. Delirious patients often say strange things. But after he died, Victor Blackwell came to collect his belongings. He asked me very specifically what his brother had said during his final days. Zeke leaned forward. And you told him? I said his brother had been mostly incoherent, but something in Blackwell's manner made me uneasy. I mentioned it to Dr. Phillips, who said there had been rumors about miners who opposed the company going missing. Nothing proven, but... She shrugged. 2 days later, Dr. Phillips was found dead, a riding accident, and that night I was abducted. Sheriff Buchanan whistled low. That's quite a story, and fits with some things I've heard about Blackwell. Problem is, we're outside my jurisdiction. Silver City would have to pursue this. They won't, Bridget said with certainty. The mining company owns half the town, including the law. If Blackwell is working for them, silencing people who ask questions, then going back to Silver City would be suicide, Zeke finished for her. Sheriff Buchanan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Jennings is wanted in 3 counties. I can hold him on those charges while I make some inquiries. But Miss Norwood, you should consider that you might not be safe here for long. If Jennings doesn't report back, Blackwell might send others. She can stay at my ranch, Zeke said firmly. It's isolated, defensible. Few people even know she's there. Bridget looked at him with gratitude, though her heart was heavy. I've already put you in enough danger, Zeke. I can't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering. His expression brooked no argument. Besides, Blackwell doesn't know who I am or where to find you. By the time he figures it out, we'll have a plan. Sheriff Buchanan nodded approvingly. It's a good temporary solution. I'll send word to the territorial marshal about this. Mining company or not, murder and kidnapping are serious charges. In the meantime, keep your heads down and stay alert. They left Deeming before dawn the next morning, taking a circuitous route back to Zeke's ranch to ensure they weren't followed. The journey was tense, both of them scanning the landscape constantly for signs of pursuit. I should leave the territory, Bridget said as they neared the ranch. Go east, maybe. Somewhere Blackwell would never think to look. Zeke's hands tightened on the reins. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. It's what's safest for both of us. He was silent for a long moment. What if there was another option, a way to stay but be safe? Bridget looked at him questioningly. Silver City and Deeming aren't the only towns in the territory, Zeke said carefully. Plenty of places need a skilled nurse. Places where Blackwell has no influence. Perhaps, Bridget acknowledged, but I'd still be looking over my shoulder. And anyone close to me would be at risk. They lapsed into silence again, each lost in their own thoughts as the ranch came into view. Mrs. Porter was watching for them from the porch, her relief evident as they pulled up to the house. "Thank the Lord," the older woman exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "When I got Zeke's message about trouble in town, I was beside myself with worry." As they explained the situation, Mrs. Porter's expression grew increasingly grave. "Well," she said finally, "it seems to me you've got yourself a dangerous enemy, Miss Bridget, but you've got friends too, remember that." Over the next few days, they settled into a tense routine. Zeke set his ranch hands to patrolling the boundaries of his property, and Bridget stayed close to the house. She had fully embraced her recovered identity now, though she asked Zeke and Mrs. Porter to continue calling her Miracle among others, as an added precaution. "It suits you better anyway," Zeke told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Bridget Norwood sounds like someone else entirely." "She was," Bridget replied softly. "I'm not the same person who was thrown in that river. Maybe it's the memory loss, or maybe it's everything that's happened since, but I feel changed." Zeke studied her profile in the fading light. "For what it's worth, I like who you are now, whoever that may be." She turned to look at him, her expression vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "Zeke, if I leave, don't," he interrupted, more sharply than he'd intended. More gently he added, "At least not yet. Sheriff Buchanan sent word that the territorial marshal is investigating. Give it time." What he didn't say, couldn't say, was that the thought of her leaving twisted something painful in his chest. Since pulling her from the river, she had become the center of his world in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged until faced with the prospect of her absence. A week passed with no word from town and no sign of trouble. The ranch work continued. Cattle needed tending, fences needed mending, crops needed harvesting regardless of personal crises. Bridget threw herself into helping Mrs. Porter, and even began assisting with some of the minor medical issues that arose among the ranch hands. "You're good at that," Zeke observed after watching her skillfully bandage a nasty cut on his foreman's arm. "It feels right," Bridget admitted. "Like coming home to myself in a way." "I've been thinking about what you said about other towns needing nurses." Zeke's heart skipped, and maybe you're right. Maybe I don't have to leave the territory, just start fresh somewhere else. Before Zeke could respond, one of the ranch hands rode in at a gallop, pulling his horse up sharply near the house. "Riders coming, boss," he reported breathlessly. "4 of them, armed, don't recognize any from around these parts." Zeke's expression hardened. "How far out?" "Half hour, maybe less. They're not hurrying, but they're coming straight for the ranch." Zeke turned to Bridget, who had gone pale. "Get inside. Pack only what you need. Mrs. Porter will help you." "Zeke, no," Bridget protested. "I won't have you fighting my battles. These men are here for me, not you. All the more reason for you to be nowhere near here when they arrive." He gripped her shoulders gently but firmly. "Please, Miracle, trust me." Something in his voice, the use of the name he'd given her, perhaps made her relent. "What are you going to do?" "Buy you time, then follow." He glanced at his foreman. "Miguel, ready the buckboard, back entrance, quiet as you can. Take her to the Martinez place first, then the mission if needed. I'll find you." Miguel nodded and hurried off to comply. Mrs. Porter was already guiding Bridget inside, murmuring reassurances that did little to ease the terror in her heart. 20 minutes later, Bridget found herself in the back of a buckboard, a shawl over her head, jolting down a barely visible trail that skirted Zeke's property. Mrs. Porter sat beside her, clutching a small valise containing their few belongings. "He'll be all right," the older woman said, patting Bridget's hand. "Mr. Keller knows how to handle himself, and he's not alone. There are 6 ranch hands with him, all armed." "That's what I'm afraid of," Bridget whispered. If there's shooting, it will be because of me. The Martinez place turned out to be a small sheep ranch about 10 miles from Zeke's property. Senora Martinez welcomed them with no questions asked, quickly ushering them into the house while her husband helped Miguel conceal the buckboard. "You will stay until it is safe," she said simply, setting out a simple meal of beans, tortillas, and goat cheese. "Zeke Keller saved my Jose's life 2 winters ago when he was caught in a blizzard. We owe him much." Bridget tried to eat, knowing she needed strength, but each bite stuck in her throat. All she could think about was Zeke facing armed men because of her, because she had brought danger to his door. Night fell with no word. Miguel had returned to the ranch, promising to come back with news as soon as possible. Senora Martinez made up beds for them in a small side room, but Bridget couldn't sleep. She sat by the window instead, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of riders. It was well past midnight when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart raced as she peered into the darkness, trying to make out the rider. "It's Zeke," Senor Martinez called from the doorway where he'd been standing guard. "Alone." Bridget rushed outside, propriety forgotten in her relief. Zeke was dismounting stiffly, his face drawn with exhaustion but otherwise unharmed. "You're all right," she breathed, stopping just short of embracing him. "I am," he confirmed, "and so are my men and the riders." A grim smile touched his lips. "Let's just say they won't be reporting back to Blackwell anytime soon." Fear clutched at her heart again. "You didn't know?" Zeke shook his head. "No one's dead, though not for lack of trying on their part. Sheriff Buchanan arrived just in time with a couple of deputies. They're locked up in Deeming now, and singing like canaries about Blackwell's operation, from what I hear." The tension drained from Bridget so suddenly that she swayed on her feet. Zeke's arm shot out to steady her, and this time she didn't resist when he pulled her against his chest. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "Buchanan says the territorial marshal has enough evidence now to go after Blackwell, with or without the Silver City authorities' cooperation." "So I can stay?" Bridget asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "In the territory, I mean." Zeke pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "You can stay wherever you want, but I was hoping. That is, I'd like it if you stayed at the ranch, with me." Bridget's breath caught. "As your housekeeper?" "No," he said softly. "As my wife." "If you'll have me." The world seemed to still around them as Bridget processed his words. "Zeke, we hardly know each other." "I know you're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever met," he countered. "I know you're skilled with your hands and quick with your mind. I know you laugh at my poor jokes and don't mind my silences. I know that when I pulled you from that river, it was like I'd been drowning my whole life and suddenly found air." He paused, his voice roughening. "And I know that the thought of you leaving feels like drowning all over again." Tears filled Bridget's eyes. "I've brought you nothing but trouble." "You've brought me life," Zeke corrected. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You reminded me there's more to living than just surviving each day." He took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, just think about it, about us." "I don't need to think about it," Bridget said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "My answer is yes." Zeke's eyes widened. "Yes, yes." She smiled through her tears. "I don't know what the future holds, or if we'll be safe from Blackwell forever. But I do know that I love you, Zeke Keller, and that's worth any risk." The joy that transformed Zeke's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He cupped her face in his hands with a reverence that made her heart swell, then kissed her under the vast New Mexico sky, with the Martinez's tactfully retreating to give them privacy. When they finally broke apart, breathless and smiling, Zeke rested his forehead against hers. "What should I call you now?" Bridget or Miracle, she considered for a moment. Bridget is who I was. Miracle is who I became with you. Perhaps I can be both. Bridget Miracle Keller, Zeke tested the name. Has a nice ring to it, she laughed, the sound bright and free in the night air. It does indeed. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Deeming, with Mrs. Porter, the Martineses, and Sheriff Buchanan in attendance. The territorial marshal had made good on his promise to investigate Victor Blackwell, and while the case was still developing, initial arrests had been made that suggested Blackwell's influence was rapidly crumbling. "Don't let your guard down entirely," the sheriff advised at the small reception afterward. "Men like that have long memories and longer reaches, but I'd say you're as safe as anyone can be out here." "We'll be careful," Zeke assured him, his arm around his new wife's waist. "And ready, if trouble comes." But as the months passed, it seemed trouble had indeed passed them by. Bridget established herself as the unofficial medical authority for the area, treating everything from minor injuries to delivering babies when the doctor couldn't arrive in time. Her reputation spread, and soon people were traveling considerable distances to seek her care. Zeke's ranch prospered as well. With Bridget's practical input and careful management of their finances, they were able to purchase additional land and expand their herd. Mrs. Porter remained with them, declaring herself too old to adjust to a new household, though she gladly ceded many of the domestic responsibilities to Bridget. News eventually reached them that Victor Blackwell had been convicted of multiple counts of murder and corruption, and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. While the news brought relief, Bridget and Zeke both knew that the frontier was unpredictable. Today's prisoner could be tomorrow's escapee. They maintained their vigilance, but refused to let fear dictate their lives. On their first anniversary, Zeke presented Bridget with a gift, the deed to a small building in Deeming. "For what?" she asked, puzzled. "For your clinic," he explained. "The town needs a proper medical facility, and you need a place to practice that isn't our kitchen table." Tears welled in her eyes. "Zeke, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take it," he urged. "You've got the skills and the calling. Deeming deserves better than a circuit doctor who comes through once a month." And so the Miracle Clinic was established, named not for Bridget's nickname, but for the many miraculous recoveries her patients seemed to experience under her care. Zeke built her a custom cabinet for her medical supplies and instruments, and took obvious pride in his wife's growing reputation as a healer. 2 years into their marriage, during a particularly harsh winter, Bridget discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled their home with joy, though Zeke's protective instincts reached new heights of vigilance. "You're hovering, husband," Bridget teased as he insisted on accompanying her to the clinic yet again. "I'm protecting my family," he corrected, his hand gentle on the swell of her belly. "Both of you." Their son, Samuel Thomas Keller, was born on a clear spring morning, with Mrs. Porter serving as midwife while Zeke paced anxiously outside the bedroom. When finally allowed in, the expression on his face as he held his son for the first time brought fresh tears to Bridget's eyes. "He's perfect," Zeke whispered, awe in his voice, "just like his mother." As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the ranch and clinic continued to thrive. Deeming itself was expanding rapidly, and Bridget found herself training 2 young women as nurses to help meet the growing demand for medical care. "Who would have thought?" she mused one evening as she and Zeke sat on their porch, watching the sunset while 3-year-old Samuel played with wooden blocks at their feet. "That being thrown in a river would lead to all this." Zeke reached over to take her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band he'd placed there. "I thank God every day that I decided to check the river that morning," "As do I," Bridget replied softly, "though sometimes I wonder what became of the woman I was before." "Bridget Norwood seems like someone from a story now." "She's still part of you," Zeke observed. "I see her in the way you handle difficult patients and your determination when facing challenges. But Miracle is the one who built this life with me." Bridget leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Then I'm grateful for both of my lives, and especially for the cowboy who carried me home." News came from Silver City, occasionally mostly updates on former patients or colleagues who sought Bridget out in her new life. Victor Blackwell died in prison during a typhoid outbreak in the winter of 1880, bringing final closure to that chapter of their lives. By the time Samuel was 5, he had a sister, Elizabeth Porter Keller, named for Mrs. Porter, who had become like a grandmother to their children. The old housekeeper beamed with pride whenever the little girl toddled after her, helping with the household chores. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons and milestones. The ranch expanded, the clinic flourished, the children grew. Deeming itself evolved from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools, churches, and civic organizations in which both Bridget and Zeke played active roles. On the 10th anniversary of the day Zeke had pulled her from the river, Bridget woke before dawn and slipped quietly from their bed. She dressed warmly and made her way to the stable, saddling her mare with practiced ease. The ride to the riverbank took less than an hour in the pre-dawn light. She dismounted at the spot where Zeke had found her, now marked by a small cairn of stones they had placed there years ago. The Rio Grande flowed steadily, indifferent to the human dramas it had witnessed. Bridget stood on the bank, watching the water catch the first rays of sunrise, turning from slate gray to burnished gold. "I thought I might find you here." She turned to see Zeke approaching on horseback, his familiar figure silhouetted against the lightening sky. "I didn't want to wake you," she said as he dismounted and came to stand beside her. "Some anniversaries need to be marked," he replied simply, slipping his arm around her waist. They stood in comfortable silence for a time, watching the river and the emerging day. "You ever regret it?" Bridget asked finally. "Taking in a half-dead stranger, all the danger and uncertainty I brought with me." Zeke turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Not for a single moment. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, even with everything that followed." "Especially with everything that followed." He smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Though I admit, I could have done without those 4 armed men showing up at our door." Bridget laughed, the sound bright and free in the morning air. "Our life has certainly never been dull." "And I wouldn't change a thing about it," Zeke said firmly. "Or about you, Bridget, Miracle, Mrs. Keller, whatever name you go by." "I'm fond of the last one," she murmured, stepping closer to him. "As am I." He kissed her then, with the same tenderness that had marked their first kiss under the New Mexico stars a decade earlier. When they finally broke apart, Bridget took one last look at the river that had nearly claimed her life and then ultimately led her to it. "Shall we go home?" she asked. "The children will be waking soon, and Mrs. Porter will have breakfast waiting." "Home," Zeke agreed, helping her mount her horse before swinging up onto his own. The best word in any language. As they rode side by side across the landscape they both loved, Bridget reflected on the twisted path that had brought her here from nurse to near victim to survivor to wife, mother, and healer. The river had tried to take her life, but instead had given her a new one. And the cowboy who had carried her home had given her something even more precious, a place to belong, a family to love, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. They crested the hill that overlooked their ranch, now a thriving operation with several outbuildings, corrals full of horses, and fields of crops stretching toward the horizon. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney of the main house, where their children and Mrs. Porter awaited. "Race you home," Bridget challenged with a mischievous smile. Zeke's laugh was all the answer she needed as they urged their horses forward, galloping together toward the life they had built from nothing but love, courage, and second chances, their own personal miracle on the banks of the Rio Grande.